Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Council's executive meeting this morning. So a slightly different time and place, but nice to see you all, councillors, officers, public participants, and also those watching along at home. Our first item is declarations of interest. So I'll give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues have any additional declarations to declare. Whilst I'm doing that, I'll also note the apologies from Councillor Douglas, and we've got Councillor Kilbane substituting, so welcome. Everybody else is here that we were expecting. So I can't see any colleagues indicating, so no additional declarations of interest to declare. That takes us straight through to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. So these are set out on pages 1 to 22 of the agenda pack. So again, I'll just give a couple of seconds for colleagues until I will ask whether you accept the minutes. I can see some nods and some smiles, so I will assume that the minutes of the previous meeting are accepted. Thank you very much. Which takes us straight on to public participation. And we've got 5 registered public participants today. 3 of whom are with us in the room, 2 are joining us remotely. So welcome to them. And as they will each know, they have 3 minutes to talk to the executive on the topics that they're registered for. So our first public speaker is Gwen Swinburne, and that's matters within the executive's remit on governance. And you'll know how it works, but your 3 minutes start when you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, that's actually within the governance of the devolution debate. So I will raise 6 of the many governance issues. Whilst everyone is trying to limit what the mayor can or cannot do, the same cannot be said for what is almost a carte blanche for our 2 representatives on the combined authority. The wording in most places gives the impression that 2 councillors from York, without any apparent delegations, can pretty well do what they want on that combined authority. This needs to be addressed before it gets out of hand. We also see that only 2 councillors will be on the combined authority from York, effectively excluding opposition members from both authorities. How sad that the power hungry are not open to the least bit of engagement, particularly so in York, where Labour has 17 and Lib Dems only 21 of the 47 seats. The least would be to invite non-voting lead opposition members to the cabinet as per our arrangements in York. I cannot see, with great respect to the LEP partners, why they should ever have an opportunity to have a vote or be termed a cabinet member. They are not accountable to us and should therefore never have a vote. The joint committee to be set up immediately, it seems, cannot be agreed to without a scheme of delegations. It is far too open as of now. Regarding this joint committee, I have written in, as it seems North Yorkshire County Council will be clerking. May we have assurances that these meetings will all be face-to-face, as required by law, that they will have to have public participation using York protocols, not North Yorkshire's, and that meetings have to be webcast and retained. Can we be assured all these combined authority meetings will be on our ModGov system and calendars, not just on the North Yorkshire website? Finally, on page 116, Chair, the equalities impact assessment is, in my view, in error. We note, to their credit, North Yorkshire County Council has people on low income as a criteria. Erroneously, City of York Council has not ticked this box for the non-parished-in awards. We will be the only part of the combined authority without a first tier town council, which means the current significant institutional and democratic deficits in the inner deprived wards will be exacerbated. This has to be recognised in the equalities impact assessment. And sorry to bang on about that, Councillor Smalley.
Thank you very much. And we'll take into account your comments when we consider the item at agenda item 5. Thank you very much. Our second public speaker today is Carol Green, who's registered to speak on agenda item 7, the enhanced partnership, and also to hand in a petition. And you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
I'm struggling a bit because the loop system isn't working. It keeps coming and going. So I may not catch anything you say. I'm bringing a petition for 1,235 people who are very concerned about the future of the number 11 bus. I've checked through the forms, make sure there's no duplicates. Everyone's postcode is along the route, so 1,235. Although the COVID funding saved it in August, we've still to hear how it will be funded from March onwards. The concerns for this service are not just expressed by my fellow villagers at the end of the route. From South Bank, where bus services would finish should the 11 cease to run, there are groups who are massively affected. I'm told by many of the people living at the residence, former Terry's Chocolate Factory, that they bought their apartments because they were promised a bus stop right outside to travel in both directions, and this affected their decision to move there. At Middlethorpe Hall, the guests are encouraged to leave their cars in the car park there and use the bus into York. This is a significant number of vehicles kept out of the city on a daily basis, and members of staff use the bus to get to work. Further along the route is the crematorium for the whole area. How can it exist without a regular bus service? Relatives from outside York attending funerals need a bus to the crem, and all the bereaved who don't drive need the bus to visit on key anniversaries. Bishopthorpe itself has a large, older, retired population, many of whom no longer use a car. The benefit that taking the bus into town gives for people living on their own cannot be overestimated in keeping the mental health of older people at a positive level. Older people in need of support get their visits from carers or relatives who use the bus service to get to them. I've heard many examples. Brunswick Organic Nursery, which gives employment to people with learning difficulties from all over York, needs the trainees to be able to access it by bus. And when I was collecting signatures in the street, I discovered that several people from Neighbourne use the bus by coming over the Sustrans track on the railway bridge. So I've tried to make sure all the signatures are genuine, people who would be really adversely affected by the loss of the service. And to this end, I put on top all the forms where somebody's made a comment about either about why they couldn't manage it, or in some cases, suggestions for ways to save money on the service. So I hope that someone will find time to read through these. Many of the residents understand that it's an economic decision, but they hope that the very great need for a regular service will count for more. In conclusion, as I live in Main Street and can count the number of people on the bus as it passes, I'm reasonably convinced that the use of the bus has increased since the danger of losing it was brought to people's attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I don't know whether you've got something to hand, but if you'd like to hand it to James as the closest, and then, oh, but okay. And then James will pass it along. Thank you very much. Our third public speaker today is Flick Williams, who's joining us remotely, and that is also on the enhanced partnership current issues with it. And so hopefully you can hear me, and you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
September was Catch a Bus month. Many of us tried. The BSIP funding of £17.36 million is to be welcomed, especially where it leads to improvements in infrastructure. Better information in both visual and audible formats is long overdue. I note the goal is to grow patronage by 25%, while, and I quote, the vast majority of decisions around commercial bus services will remain the sole responsibility of independent bus operators. And there is the disconnect, because we are losing CityZap from November, and the reprieves for services 11 and 12 due to an extension in COVID recovery grants may well be short-lived. Disabled and older people who have no alternative to buses are at greater risk of exclusion and social isolation, unable to get to medical appointments and join community activities. How can this meet the council's objectives for both health and wellbeing and getting around sustainably? Buses are a lifeline and active travel not an option for many. I am never going to be able to cycle using any type of machine, and looking around at my fellow bus passengers, the octogenarians struggling with walkers and shopping trolleys, neither are they ever. And of course, for wheelchair users who may only travel in a single space per bus, every single bus that doesn't run affects us disproportionately. I have a catalogue of bus woes from disabled passengers, many of them outright access refusals. I've even been contacted by a bus driver who spoke of frustration at being unable to board wheelchair users because of illegally parked vehicles with no enforcement action. I note the good intention to introduce a charter with a specific objective of ensuring wheelchair users are not left behind by multiple buses, like the young woman who was left at Waterend by 5 buses in a row, you mean? A charter then, how reassuring. I'll be sure to get a copy and wave it as I sit by the roadside, or perhaps hand it to the bus driver that does stop in exchange for the ticket they give me, on which is printed, "Passengers refuse to move." The law in this point is settled. It is a wheelchair priority space, and driver training needs to ensure this point is made clear to those with buggies who are trying to avoid having to fold them. If buses can wait on stands until those without a valid ticket alight, they can wait on stands until passengers refusing to move from the wheelchair space have a change of heart. Or is revenue protection more important than not discriminating against disabled people? So I eagerly await the commitment to practical measures that will accompany this charter. Meanwhile, I shall be making legal a claim against buses that leave me behind, in the firm belief that commercial services, as this report underlines, only understand the language of money. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account on agenda item 7. Our fourth public speaker is also joining us remotely, Doreen Magill, who's registered on agenda item 7, the enhanced partnership, on the structure of the partnership, frequency of meetings and representation. So again, hopefully you can hear me and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, I'm speaking partly on behalf of the York Bus Forum, of which I'm chair. I note that the enhanced partnership itself has already been formed, but I've also been told that it can be changed, and it is change that we're looking for. It's supposed to be enhanced, and it looks very much like exactly, the same old that we've had before. And as both Carol and Flick have said, what we've got currently just isn't working. You only have to look at other authorities to realise what the threats are to bus services. In York, yes, they've been put off for 6 months because the COVID funding was extended, but those threats are still there. And as I say, if you look at other authorities, you'll realise Sheffield didn't take the funding. And if you look at the cuts there, that is what is coming to York. And the enhanced partnership does need to take that on board and to work out how to genuinely enhance the experience and the strength of York's buses. After all, they have been given the BSIP funding. Looking at the structure of the forum, it's, as I say, it is as the Quality Bus Partnership really. Feeding into it is a forum, the Enhanced Partnership Forum feeds into the Enhanced Partnership itself. But that forum is not a decision-making body. The decisions will be made in exactly the way that they have been made in the past. And there's every chance, looking at the structure, that the decision-making body will ignore the passengers and the stakeholders. Just looking at the consultation leading into the enhanced partnership, I note that it says that 543 people responded. I've actually been told that that's quite good as responses to these things go, but I think that 543 out of a population of over 200,000 is appalling. And I think that that shows that the enhanced partnership is not going to listen to the passengers. The most important people in all of this are the passengers. All right, passengers need buses, but buses need passengers. This is, yes, it's a business. We know that the bus companies are businesses, but unless they really try, and the council tries to get those passengers on those buses, to persuade people, to give them a service that they will use. People want to use buses. It's up to the council and the operators to give them the buses where they want them, when they want them, and of a quality that is sufficient. We need improvement and we need greater accountability from this new enhanced partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your comments will get taken into account when we consider agenda item 7. Our fifth public speaker who's with us in the room is Ian Craven, registered on agenda item 9, Haxby Station, regards lack of consultation. And you have 3 minutes when you start.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, I'm here to speak about the Haxby Station and the lack of consultation. I spoke at the meeting of the 16th of December 2021 on this matter, listing the concerns about consultation. However, reading the minutes, it is reported this was not true. I would like to put on record, no consultation took place regarding Torthorpe. In fact, a ward councillor explained we could not debate this issue due to commercial interests. So I'd like the record amended. The recent public consultation with residents was flawed because it did not follow government regulations on consultation, because it only provided a biased view to support the decision of this location. Since the roadshow, there has not been any discussion on this issue with Haxby Town Council. The project report submitted to this committee is flawed in a number of parts due to the lack of supporting evidence, which should have been discussed with Haxby Town Council and would have helped with the siting of the local station. This location is going to increase council expenditure, but a location close to the bypass would reduce council expenditure because much of the new infrastructure proposed is not needed. For example, bus services already run close to the bypass, so the need for extra parking and buses are not needed. There appears to be a great deal of council concerns about a link with Strensall, which is leading to an increase in taxpayers' support. But evidence shows that locating in the new Ayswick area would help the green agenda and as a consequence would reduce council expenditure to support this project. Proper consultation is necessary as described by government regulation, with all parties, including New Ayswick, Haxby and Wigginton councils, which will ensure a proper detailed study covering traffic congestion, equality, environmental impact assessments, light pollution, as well as safeguarding. These need to be done now, not as part of the planning application, which will be too late. If the timetable is critical, then the council should apply to the new Transport Secretary, seeking an extension to the timetable, expressing the need to obtain value for money for this project, rather than building something which will not deliver the main objective for both the residents of the City of York and government. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments that we'll take into account when we consider agenda item 9. So thank you to all of our public speakers today. That takes us now on to agenda item 4, the forward plan. So this is on pages 23 to 26. Again, I'll give a couple of seconds in case colleagues want to raise anything. And then I will ask whether you're happy to accept the forward plan. So I can see some hands and some smiles. So we will accept the forward plan. Thank you very much. That takes us on to agenda item 5, which is the devolution deal, and then commencing consultation. This is on pages 27 to 166 in our pack. And as we know, this is the first time that we're considering this today, and then subject to our decision this morning, we have full council this evening to then consider the document as well. So I think I'm going to hand over to Ian first, and obviously welcome James and Will to the table.
Yeah, just very briefly from myself, because Will's going to just go through some of the key points in the report. First thing I just want to say is to thank the staff actually who've got us to this point. It's taken a lot of officers' input to actually get to this stage. So just wanted to record thanks for that. Clearly, this is a significant opportunity, one which looks to secure significant additional funding going forward. The funding which is included in the report is very much a first stage. We do envisage, hopefully, that there will be clearly further funding that follows in future years. there is a lot still clearly to be done, and clearly subject to the consultation. There's a further decision to be made, which we envisage would be around February of next year. The actual creating of the combined authority, though, will also entail a significant period of work. We clearly are starting from a point where there is no combined authority established, so we have to create that organisation effectively from scratch, as it were. The only other point I wanted to add is clearly this isn't without some risk and also some unknowns. I would categorise that by saying clearly there is some political risk. You don't need me to tell you in terms of some of the political issues at the moment, and clearly, you know, things can change in the world of politics. And I just make that point that clearly there are some assumptions made here, both now and going ahead, and there is inevitably a potential for change in that regard. I would also highlight that there is reference to York Central in there, just to make it clear that is at this point in time a minded to approval. So there's still some work to be done in terms of that, and that's just to make that very clear that that agreement is not fully signed off at this point in time. Clearly, we very much hope it will be, but I just need to make that clear in terms of that. And also, when you look ahead in terms of future funding, if you look at the other combined authorities that are in existence, they have secured significant additional funding, as say, after the first stage, particularly around transport. We hope to get that. We hope to benefit in the way many other combined authorities have done so. But again, I just highlight that clearly we can't be absolutely certain of that. So loads of opportunities, think, going forward to attract additional funding. But there are, as I say, some unknowns as we look ahead over future years. I'll stop there and let Will take you through some of the key elements of the report.
Thank you very much. So on the 1st of August, the council leader signed an in-principle devolution agreement with York and North Yorkshire, with the leader of North Yorkshire County Council and the Secretary of State. So this allowed us to move to the next step to test whether that was a deal which was appropriate for York and North Yorkshire. So the report in front of you takes through the next steps of that approval process, which is largely defined by statutory process. So we're following the statutory processes here to progress it. So the deal itself provides powers in investment across a range of areas, notably transport, housing and regeneration and skills. And the deal requires that the governance arrangements are put in place to create a mayoral combined authority for York and North Yorkshire, and the election of a mayor to oversee the combined authority. So the steps in terms of the statutory process require us to carry out a governance review, which is included in Appendix 1. That seeks to demonstrate that York and North Yorkshire is a logical geography for the combined authority area. It identifies the economic challenges within the area and looks at the governance options and how they might address those economic challenges. And finally, it concludes that the mayoral combined authority, which would unlock the deal, provides the best opportunity to address those challenges. And finally, it concludes that the mayoral combined authority would likely improve the exercise of statutory functions in the area, which is the statutory test that the Secretary of State needs to be satisfied of. On the basis of that governance review, a scheme has been drafted, which is attached to Appendix 2, which outlines the governance arrangements which would satisfy the requirements of the deal. So essentially creating a mayoral combined authority and the election of a mayor. So if executive and full council approve that draft scheme, consultation will begin in October to gather the views of residents, businesses and other organisations. The results of those consultations would be reviewed by executive and full council in the new year. The report also requests delegated authority to manage the costs of necessary work as part of that statutory process. namely mostly consultation costs initially in order to carry out the statutory consultation. And secondly, it also asked for to approve the creation of a joint committee between York and North Yorkshire to allow decisions around the detail of the of potential combined authority to be taken by York and North Yorkshire jointly prior to the development, prior to the combined authority itself coming into being. So that's so the next step, obviously, if approval is given, will be to move to consultation, and just to make it clear, even with the joint committee, the decision to submit the consultation responses to government will be taken by Executive and Council here and by North Yorkshire County Council, not by the joint committee. The joint committee would be looking at the more sort of practical implementation detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Don't know whether there's anything you want to add at this stage.
I think Will summed it up very nicely, but also happy to answer any questions that anyone's got. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So obviously, I'll open it for any questions or comments from colleagues. I'll just echo some of Ian's points at the start. Obviously, for a considerable time now, we've discussed and long discussed the idea of devolution for York and North Yorkshire. And over the years, as government policies or ministers have changed, so has that discussion and what really has been on offer. And many of us will remember the discussions around One Yorkshire and how ministers over that period of time set out different pathways to achieving devolution for our region and also for our city. And obviously, we are now at a really crucial point on that journey, and this paper marks the closest we have been to achieving devolution for York, and with it the scale of investment that entails. The report sets out in front of you the large amount of work that has taken place to bring us to this point. So again, thank you to officers and colleagues that have been involved in that, and it marks months of negotiations with government representatives to secure that deal. In summary, an additional 540 million for transport, housing and education would be devolved to our city and region over the next 30 years. That's over £500 million transferred from central government to York and North Yorkshire to invest in local priorities. And if agreed, this deal would be the first city and rural region to see devolution on the scale seen by other city regions already, and would obviously therefore be a real step change in the level of investment that we see as a city. Given the current state of public finances nationally, this therefore could be a particularly critical moment for York. I know that some people in the city and some councillors will have reservations about the mayoral model. I do sympathise with that. As council leader, I have said that it is my job to be pragmatic to achieve the best for our local communities. And to achieve that major investment, particularly the regeneration opportunities, this is the way that the government is devolving money and power at the moment. And even if I do not like every last detail of the administrative arrangements, and given the levels of funding and devolved powers on offer, this undoubtedly presents a real opportunity for York, not just to secure that investment, but to have greater influence over the matters that residents care about. That's why I think it's important that we progress this work and that we make that recommendation to full council later to then go out to consult on the scheme. As outlined in paragraph 7, if full council then agrees with our recommendations this evening, a consultation on the details and timeline would happen and it would launch in mid-October. And given the significance, it really is important that that consultation considers the views of residents from a wide range of backgrounds, groups and organisations across the city. And I'm pleased to see that we've secured support from the Consultation Institute to undertake that work. Ultimately, the proposed deal, as I said, will be considered this evening, where colleagues will be able to review feedback. But then it will come back to full council in the future once that consultation has been completed. And on that basis, I'm happy to support the recommendations. And I'm just going to clarify at 16.1 in the report, there's just a slight amendment to the recommendation in front of us, and that is that executive is asked to approve the proposals and to recommend that full council agrees. And that is just to make the point that some of those are executive functions. So therefore we need to approve it, and then it will go to full council to then agree it. I'll just check with Bryn, who's nodding, that is the correct interpretation. So when we get to the recommendation, it will be slightly tweaked. Happy to open it to any comments and questions. Councillor de Gorne.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you've already highlighted, this report marks a major milestone for York, with significant government funding for the region over the next 30 years and the opportunity to work together across North Yorkshire to deliver greater autonomy and tackle the climate and cost of living crisis that we face. Today, we've reached the point where key decisions regarding the statutory consultation joint committee and establishment funding are required from full council later today. I'd like to echo Ian's comments in thanking all the officers who spent many hours working up this proposal in partnership with the colleagues in North Yorkshire, securing a wide range of elements which will be of significant importance to our city and the future prosperity and well-being of our citizens. As everyone can see from the report, the proposed deal comes with considerable funding, as has been mentioned, for York and North Yorkshire over the next 30 years. This money will be transferred to us by central government, and crucially, it's only available through this deal. The proposed deal also comes with some new powers dissolved down from central government and other agencies, bringing new powers closer to the people in the city. From my perspective, there's some very important elements providing us with an additional £50 million, as you indicated, Ian, not fully secured, but hopefully that will be part of the package to support the York Central development, bringing forward an exemplar zero carbon development that provides economic prosperity and affordable living right at the heart of York, and yet helping to sustain our historic city close by. Like some other in the city, I do share the concerns that have been raised about the Metro Mayor model, particularly given some transport powers will be moved up to the region's new combined authority. However, as has been clearly stated, this is a government process which we don't have control over. And if we want to secure that investment, this is the only way in which we can do that. Devolution certainly helps us accelerate the local and regional work we're undertaking to address many of our challenges, including access to the devolved transport budgets from government. Scale of investment could unlock and progress crucial work on other aspects such as York Central, Bio Yorkshire, and help us tackle the climate emergency on a wider scale. So it's, given the changes that are envisaged, it's only right we should ensure we fully engage with and consult with residents, organisations and businesses on such fundamental change for our city's governance. If full council agrees to proceed this evening, colleagues will be asked to consider approving the proposed deal later in the year towards the coming year. Feedback from the communities in our city will be essential to help us consider that decision. So it's important we can get moving on that consultation. So I'm happy to support the recommendations as outlined and refer to full council.
Thank you very much, Councillor de Gorne. Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Maybe James or Will, but there's a lot been done with skills and with our partners in the city, particularly around enhanced employment opportunities. I just wondered how that new deal is going to affect those relationships and that work we've done.
Yeah, there's some really good work being done around skills in York around that. And obviously within the deal, there's the adult education budget, which flows down. Currently, the strategic control of that isn't within the region, it's outside the region. So we do actually get more control of that. So with regard to how we're planning to take that forward, so City of York are absolutely at the heart of that. So Alison Edison, who heads up the skills in York, is part of that development team with regard to that. So there's a number of things around skills in there. There's the adult education budget. There's also feeding into the local skills improvement plans, which are the chamber are developing, and City of York officers, along with North Yorkshire officers and the LEP, are all working seamlessly. So we make sure the existing evidence base and strategies are the foundations on what we build the plans, and they're not done to. It's done with, and we build up from the bottom.
Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you. Got a couple of questions, and I'm not sure which one of you I asked them to, so if I ask them to you both, is that okay? It's following on, it also picks up from a couple of comments from the public speakers. So regarding governance arrangements, do they significantly differ from any of the other devolution deals? That's kind of the first part of my question. And the second part of the question is, how do we make sure that it works correctly for York so that the mayor is accountable? Could you just take me through how that happens, please?
So I think across different combined authorities, there's different flavours of governance arrangements, but largely having the same sort of characteristics broadly. So the membership of the combined authority is a relatively standard approach across other areas. We obviously are slightly different in the fact that there's two local authorities within the arrangement. That is different to most combined authorities. So largely it's the same in terms of the governance and the way it will work. For York, obviously it's self-evident that the mayor is elected to represent York and North Yorkshire. The combined authority itself as an entity will be sort of strategy led, so it will be drawing upon an evidence base at a York and North Yorkshire level. And I think the reality from other places is that's fed from the local authorities to a large degree as well. We'll be working on proposals to ensure there is a clear sort of intelligence and data capability within the combined authority, and drawing from the local authorities to ensure that local need is represented at that level. So I think the way the governance arrangements are designed is to seek to ensure that the strategies that come forward are based on need. And in terms of the way the mayor then behaves on top of that, so they are representing York and North Yorkshire. They have significant powers. That's the point of the model. That's why the funding is received. But many of those powers require local consent from York and from North Yorkshire if it relates to them. So I think the whole setup is designed to ensure that it supports the needs of the whole area.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, hopefully, to Will and James. It's been quite well reported that this deal, when you look at the existing 6 deals across the north, is the second highest funding per head of population. A simple question, hopefully, in terms of, was this what was offered at the outset, or is this something that was achieved throughout the negotiations?
Yeah, it was part of the negotiations. So the way the negotiations worked is, so if you think that underpinning the deal is the 30-year mayoral investment fund, and then there are the different elements around transport, net zero, etc. So the way the negotiations happened were you negotiated the bits within the government department, so transport, net zero, etc. first, and then the final bit of the negotiation was then the mayoral investment fund and the level of that. So that was what was negotiated. If you like, the amount that was on the table to start with was understandably from a government point of view less than that, and obviously we were able to negotiate that up at the 11th hour, as it were, and that's the way negotiations happened. So yeah, it's a good deal, but credit to the Ian and Richard Flinton and the senior people who kind of came in at that 11th hour and kind of led that bit of the negotiation. But yeah, it was negotiated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane.
Hi, thanks, Keith. I've got a couple of questions for Will and then one for yourself, Councillor Ashton. Just this does feel very rushed. So what's the reason for such a tight timescale? And the other question is, what's the potential to change the governance arrangements in the future?
Do you want to do the question for me at the same time?
If you think you'll remember.
Might give me longer.
Okay. Listening to the concerns that you've raised, that Councillor de Gorn's raised about the mayoral model, and given that we know that the mayor will be majority elected by North Yorkshire, so let's face it, the mayor is going to be probably a Tory mayor forever. What are you doing to make sure that residents of York get the best deal that they can out of this, and we just don't get steamrolled by North Yorkshire?
Thank you. So in terms of it being rushed, I think obviously this is a process been underway for quite some time yet. Now we were waiting for several years, I think, for the white paper from government to come out to explain what the devolution framework would be. And then when that was announced in February, we started entering into negotiations. And then there is a natural point which where it makes sense for elections to align, which is 2024 which is proposed election date for a mayor. That's a sensible timeline on the basis that's when the next PFCC election would be. And so trying to align it with that makes sense as the powers would come along. If you don't do that, then you're out of sync clearly, and the sort of issues then to realign it. The timescales therefore within that process, we've worked closely with civil servants on to ensure there's the right amount of time for the different statutory and legislative stages within the process. Timescales are tight. All these things are there's lots of work to be done, but it's achievable, and we're working hard to progress it at the pace it needs to be progressed.
And changes to the governance arrangements.
So the scheme as presented at the moment is obviously the one which we're recommending for consultation. Based on the consultation responses, it's possible to amend elements of the scheme. What I would say is that the scheme has been written to meet government requirements as well. So it has to be a mayoral combined authority, it has to have an election of a mayor. There are certain things that are not sort of changeable within the scope of the scheme if the deal is to be achieved. And then I think you asked about future changes. If there's future changes sort of post up and when the combined authority be up and running, that would be within the remit of the mayor and the combined authority to agree changes to any constitutional matters at that point. But again, subject to the statutory requirements of a combined authority. As you imagine, there's a lot of sort of statute around this that defines how things can and can't work. So yeah, it'd be sort of tweaks to the way things work rather than structural and significant changes.
Thank you very much. And to answer your question, which you'll be pleased to know I have remembered in the course of that meeting. I think the first thing that I would say is, given what is happening nationally, perhaps both you and I shouldn't be so sure that the mayor would be of that particular party, but we will see when that election comes in 2024. I think that the second thing that I would say is that without offending Ripon, York is the city in York and North Yorkshire. And if you look at the way the process has worked to date, whether it be early housing funding or that potential deal on York Central, it is undoubtedly York that has the capacity to drive much of the economic growth and regeneration, not just for our city, but for the wider region. So it puts us in a very unique position in the combined authority. But that in addition to that, there are a number of safeguards that have been negotiated through the process. So the first one is the actual structure of the combined authority, as Will outlined, responding to Councillor Widdowson. It is arranged very much so that it has to be a partnership between the local authorities, the councillors and the mayor in order to achieve and progress those strategic ambitions for the region. A couple of examples of that: the combined authority must agree a number of proposals, and therefore there is the ability, for example, on the budget, to vote against the mayor should that be necessary, and the local authority has to give consent for a number of different aspects. So, for example, housing or commercial schemes in your local authority area. So there are a number of safeguards. I think the other thing to say is that we've negotiated through the process, York having half the local authority places on all of those bodies. So the actual combined authority, the scrutiny committee, the audit committee, and obviously that pattern would follow for others, which is obviously for York a real safeguard to York residents and local authorities' interests throughout that process. And I think, as Councillor Tagorn and I said at the start, some of our parties don't particularly like the directly elected mayoral or commissioner model. but that is the way nationally both the Conservative and Labour parties are going. And therefore it's our job to work through that model, make sure those safeguards are in place, and make sure York and residents get the opportunities that are there through the combined authority model. So that's what we'll continue to do. I cannot see any, Councillor Kilbane.
Sorry, Councillor Ashton, can I just clarify, you're saying that York would have a veto on the budget?
So I will go to Will on the arrangements, because there are different types of budget, but I'll let Will follow that.
There are. So there's a combined authority budget and there's a mayoral budget. The combined authority budget has to be unanimously passed, I think, in terms of the arrangements. So in that sense, it has to be agreed by all parties. The mayoral budget is set by the mayor, but if 3/4 of the local authority members disagree with it, it can be pushed back for amendments. So there's a potential pushback on that on the mayoral budget as well.
Thank you very much. I can't see any further questions, so we'll now move to the recommendations, and if we recall as amended earlier in the meeting. If I could please, I'll just remind, so that 16.1, it's now executives asked to approve the proposals below and to recommend that full council agrees. So if I could please see if colleagues are happy to support those recommendations. So that's a clear consensus in favour of those proposals, and therefore full council this evening will be asked to agree that. So thank you very much. So that now takes us through to the next agenda item. Thank you, James and Will, for joining us, which is update to the community asset transfers affecting community and park assets. And this starts on page 167 to 188. And I'm going to hand over to Neil first, whilst we welcome our guest officers as well.
Thank you, Chair. As you've introduced this is an update on the community asset transfer. Some of those transfers were affected by section 123 of the Local Government Act in terms of the need for a statutory consultation, and Nick and the team are going to update you on the responses to that consultation and proposed amendments in one or two minor cases.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning, everybody. As Neil's mentioned, this report provides an update on community asset transfers and disposals of a number of community and park assets, as reported previously to Executive. Executive previously agreed to lease a number of assets by way of community asset transfers to local community groups, construct a new allotment and lease this to Rufforth Parish Council, and dispose the freehold of 2 former herdsmen's cottages located on stray land, which were considered surplus to requirements. In any proposed disposal, which includes the granting of a lease, the council must advertise its intention to do so and report back comments. This report thus outlines these comments received, as well as providing updates. And my colleague Tim is going to update on the herdsmen's cottages, followed by Dave to talk about the park assets. Tim.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, everybody. 3 comments were received in respect of the 2 herdsmen's cottages at 103 Heslington Road and 159 Mount Vale. 1 comment expressed interest in purchasing the property. 2 further comments were received, one from a local resident and one from the Micklegate planning panel, both expressing concern that the cottages could end up as holiday lets. To address these comments, we took advice from our own legal services team and independent property advice from local residential estate agents. As a result, we are now making a recommendation to sell the 2 properties on 250-year premium leases, with a clause restricting the use to a private residence only. This will be more enforceable than a restricted covenant in a freehold transfer, and will have no material effect on the capital receipts that will be achieved for both properties.
Morning, everyone. My area concerns paragraphs 19 to 30 in the report, where the comments were made on open space issues. The first concerns Mayfield South, where a number of questions were raised really about the governance and the process of how the community group that manage the site operates. as I hope I've answered these in the report, but essentially due to COVID and the timetabling of our process, the group found it quite difficult to hold things like public meetings, as we've all experienced. Since these comments were received, the group has now had a proper AGM, has full sort of notice boards on site explaining what's going on, who to contact. The next comments concern Chapman's Pond, where the community group again set out how they run the site, how they operate the site, and particularly deal with night fishing, which was a concern, and how the group is funded. Now, Friends of Chapman's Pond have been around for 25 plus years. So it's a very long track record of securing funds, both internally and externally, to help manage the site. So I have no concerns about their ability to continue to raise funds to manage the site. The last comments concerned Roundtree Park, a tennis pavilion, and that was made by somebody on behalf of the Friends of the Park, concerned about potentially competitive uses with the future use of the lodge. There's two sides to that. The lodge itself is still under review by the community as to what they'd like to do with it. I think we're some way off any kind of resolution of that decision yet. The building, the tennis pavilion itself, is so small that the number of people you can get in to make a sort of an income generating comparable or competitive group is just not going to be viable. So I don't think that's a concern to stop with the process. So I'm happy to proceed or recommend to you that all three groups continue with the management of their respective sites.
Thank you very much. Open it for any comments or questions from colleagues. I don't know whether Councillor Eyre or Councillor Smalley want to go first. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, I'll be brief, Chair. I think not much to add to what officer said. It just shows a diversity of what local authorities do, that we move from talking about a £540 million fundamental change to democratic structures of the entire county to concerns about night fishing within 2 minutes, not to downplay the issues of night fishing and drink houses, of course. In terms of the transfers and disposals, obviously we agreed about these executive quite some time ago. It's welcome to note that on the vast majority of those, there were no comments received as part of that public consultation, and obviously welcome the work that's happened at Clifton Without, the lease almost sorted, Poppleton with the lease being sorted, and the completion of the allotments at Rufford. 5 comments in terms of the entirety of disposals isn't massive, but obviously there are things that we do have to consider, and I think thanks to the officers for the work that they've done around the herdsman cottage. I think those were legitimate concerns that were raised by residents, and I'm welcome to see that we've actually been able to find a solution to solve those issues around potential holiday lets and to make sure that they're being used for what we need to do. Fully happy with the work that has been done around Chapman's Pond and the Friends of Chapman's Pond and the assurances that have been given around that, and Mayfield South as well, noticing that those governance issues have been addressed. And again, with the Roundtrees Lodge, that is something that has been going on for some particular time. I think it's probably a long way away from being an issue that will be getting to completion, but happy that the pavilion issue will not be something that will impact on that. So with that, Chair, happy to approve the recommendations on paragraph 2 on pages 167 and 168.
Thank you very much. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report and the certainty that it provides for voluntary groups who work tremendously hard to ensure and enhance local open spaces which were enjoyed by residents. Some of the responses to the consultations, such as paragraph 19, refer to a desire for members of the local community to have the opportunity to influence how these sites are managed. What support can the council or perhaps partners such as CVS offer to the leaseholders so that they are able to respond positively to offers of help and support?
Thank you very much. Dave?
I think there's a long-standing relationship with most groups. So the first port of call is just to get in touch. And I've had, particularly like most of these groups, I've had different discussions over the years with committee members. Sometimes they get different views within committees, and there's, therefore there's people who can go to, which is both our internal and external. So I know in certain examples, people have been in touch with York CVS to seek best practice or external advice on best practice for governance arrangements. And internally, there's a community inequalities team. So we have a mix of resources available for people. The key one is basically people have got to come to us and say we're not happy or we need some assistance. I'm around most groups every 3 to 6 months. So there is an ongoing relationship.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other. Oh, Councillor Kilbane.
No, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I remember when there were plans to turn Roundtree's Park Tennis Pavilion into an arc, so it would float when the park flooded. Who knows? They might revisit those plans. It'd be nice to see bowls coming back into the park as well. Anyway, in terms of the properties on Mount Vale and Hes Road, were there any conversations with Children's Services? Because obviously they're on the lookout for a children's home within the area. So were there any conversations about the suitability of those properties for that?
Yes, thank you for the question. We did indeed consult our respective services, housing, children's services, community services at the time, and they were deemed surplus to requirements, not required.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us that start on page 167 that have been proposed. So could I please see if colleagues are happy to accept those recommendations? That's a clear consensus in favour of those recommendations. Thank you very much. That now takes us on to agenda item 7, which is the Enhanced Partnership and Bus Service Improvement Plan. This starts on page 189 of our agenda pack. And I'll just give a couple of seconds. And I think James is going to then start us off on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm joined by Michael Howard and Sam Friars, who've done a lot of the work on this and have been very successful in securing 25 million for the bus services in the city. We're one of the few councils that have achieved Zebra and BSIP funding. So they really have done a fantastic job. In terms of the report, could I just make sure that we record the decisions, providing you agree with them, as per paragraph 1. The recommendation is to sort of note those, but I think if we could treat those as the recommendations in the minutes, that would help make sure we've got the right record going forward. So in May 21, this executive approved the development of an enhanced partnership, and the enhanced partnership is part of a government approach to how bus services should be run in the future. And the reason it looks a bit like our existing arrangements is that York was seen as best practice nationally, and a lot of the new arrangements are based on the model in York. That partnership has now been established and a first set of meetings is being organised, and the report seeks a delegation to me to make minor changes to the partnership in consultation with the executive member should the need arise. Any more substantive changes would obviously come back to yourselves. The report also seeks to add the 17 and a bit million into the council budgets, and part of that will also support improvements to bus services, and that's existing bus services. As some of you will be aware, we are undertaking a network review with operators at the moment. So working with operators to understand which services are under threat when the COVID money ends in March. As I've said, some of that 17.36 million will be used to carry on support for bus services, but understanding those changes in terms of what impact they will have on patronage, but also the community impact of those is an ongoing piece of work. And we will bring that back to yourselves once we've got that detailed, if any significant changes or plans are needed. I'll hand over to Michael and Sam if there's anything they want to add other than that, but if we could treat, as I said, paragraph 1 as the recommendations.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Yes, can just add, obviously, that the enhanced partnership will replace the existing voluntary quality bus partnership, which we've had up until now, working with the operators, but also enables much more continuous engagement with other stakeholders. So it does give us the opportunity to have much more engagement with passengers and people that we want to attract onto the bus as well. So try to get new passengers onto the network. As James has said, we have been successful in securing significant funding for buses in York with the BSIP funding and the Zebra funding to bring forward additional electric buses onto the network. So we must see that that's been really good opportunities within York. But I think the enhanced partnership will also recognise that buses have a number of challenges at the moment, both nationally and locally. There are numerous challenges within the bus operators and with the services since the COVID pandemic in terms of bringing passengers back and re-establishing. That's obviously been recognised by the government providing extra funding to support services through to 2023. We have been through a number of consultations in regard to the enhanced partnership, both with the operators and with the public. Overall, we've had significant support for the partnership. I think we would recognise that we have also had a number of comments around the network and network challenges that we have that I've already touched upon. And we will clearly be looking at those as part of that review. So they will be reviewed as part of any further work we do with the enhanced partnership, looking at the network moving forward. The establishment of the enhanced partnership is now key to release of the BSIP funding, and we're working with the DFT to release that funding as soon as possible, so we can commence with works during the 22-23 financial year, so that money be allowed to come into the capital programme.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of additional comments in terms of the overall context. As Michael has highlighted there, significant pressure nationally on public transport services across the piece, and that doesn't look like it's going to get any better. But just in respect of some of the comments made by the members of the public and the desire for routes to be, should we say, delivered, the model that is in front of you is the model that applies to the vast majority of the UK, which is private capital and therefore risk model in terms of delivery of services. The reason I just wanted to bring this to your attention is what you'll also see in today's papers at page 49 of the Devolution Deal is that the mayoral combined authority will have franchising, or the opportunity to bring forward franchising powers, and therefore take on board a different model, which would be a public sector risk and delivery model, which is a significant risk, but obviously just wanted to highlight that that desire of an entirely different model of delivery will be available in the future to the combined authority.
Thank you very much. So open it for any questions or comments from colleagues. Go to Councillor de Gorne first.
Thank you. As everyone fully understands, this is a critical time for public transport, facing both the outcome of COVID, changing travel patterns, increasing costs and staffing challenges, which are all of an important backdrop to this additional funding. And as has been stated, York was one of only 2 places in Yorkshire to receive BSIP funding, and certainly the Zebra funding on top of that for our clean air and low emission strategies is equally important. And we certainly want to build on the long-standing quality bus partnership, for which we've worked with operators to improve bus services and encourage greater use in support of our transport plan and environmental policies. So as the report explains, the package includes upgrades for bus infrastructure, stops, shelters, bus information and real-time screens, as well as new bus priorities. Another key part of the plan is also improved ticketing and cheaper fares for young people to boost bus use and establish that as a travel habit for life. Park and ride site upgrades and development of travel hub concept will also be undertaken through this investment, including features such as overnight parking and connections with longer distance bus routes. So many of the proposed enhanced partnership measures are designed to improve accessibility in terms of physical access and information, and reference the speakers that we've heard today. The plan does, for example, include feasibility study of a new city centre shuttle bus service and audiovisual announcements on buses, more real-time indicators at stops. In terms of access, there was also reference to the customer charter, which would address the concerns about access for wheelchair users to ensure that we do have adequate provision on our bus services for wheelchair users, as well as everyone else who's using them. So I do acknowledge the challenges that speakers have said, and certainly hope that that would be part of the work of the enhanced partnership to address those. At the heart of the proposals and plans are residents and our city's priorities. Partnership gives the council the opportunity to work closely with bus operators and give passenger services based on local and provide passenger services based on local needs. And as set out in the draft plan, there will be an enhanced partnership forum where we will have stakeholder representation, including York Bus Forum, which will replace the Quality Bus Partnership in the council's constitution. We're certainly committed to delivering bold local action to deliver economic and social benefits, green jobs, economic savings, and much improved well-being for York residents. Improved public transport is not only a benefit to local people and the local economy, it's a key tool in meeting our climate emergency and net zero commitments. Certainly, I would envisage after 6 months of operation that which we will have further reports on the operation of the new governance structure and consider any changes that might be appropriate in the light of that, taking account of views of all stakeholders. The BSIP funding and this new partnership represent a great chance to drive change through very significant investment. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing their views in the consultation, which we will consider through the partnership once it gets underway.
Thank you very much. Just to add to what Councillor de Gorne has said and pick up really on Neil's comment. So firstly, obviously, thank everybody for sharing their views on the draft agreement, but colleagues will obviously be aware of some concerns from local operators about the lack of sustainable long-term funding deals to support current services. I know that intensive work is underway by council officers and providers to encourage and support residents to return to buses and retain as many services as possible. The government's U-turn on extending the crucial emergency support until March was very welcome news, but it's also just moved that cliff edge on for another 6 months. So I've written to the Transport Secretary to highlight how the local operators are still contemplating cuts to bus services, which are still reeling from the impact of the pandemic. That includes bus driver shortages, passenger numbers not returning to pre-pandemic numbers, and that funding cliff edge, which is leaving services in a constant state of retreat, not just in York, but across the region. And obviously that letter accompanied a request for sustainable long-term funding for buses, in addition to obviously those that Councillor de Gorne have highlighted, which will prevent the need for further cuts to support driver recruitment and retention. And it's that alongside the plans laid out in the Enhanced Bus Partnership that would then ensure that those services are there for communities to drive green journeys and reduce carbon emissions, as Councillor de Gorne has just highlighted. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Kilbane.
I thought I was beaten by Councillor Craghill, but I have to go first. A couple of questions for Councillor de Gorne and a couple of questions for James, I think. In terms of the accessibility of the buses, it's design and commissioning that improves accessibility rather than charters. So in what way will this BSIP improve accessibility on the buses from where it currently is? And the other question is, in what way does the BSIP improve stakeholder involvement if they're actually excluded from any of the decision-making bodies, if it's just pretty much as it is now, where they are routinely ignored? Do you want me to carry on with the other questions? Okay, and James, I think it will be, when do you think the rapid network review will be finished? So when are we going to know what bus routes are under threat? And how much of the, I think it's 6.7 million revenue we've got in this money that we secured, how much of that will be used to support the routes under threat? Is that all coming out of the 2.28 bus network support, or there are other funds that can be tapped into? And just finally, as a comment, there might be some irony, is that we may well get bus franchising powers by 2024 through the incoming Labour government, as they have promised, but we might also be getting at the same time a mayor that doesn't want to use them. So we'll see what plays out.
Thank you very much. James, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so in terms of the network review, that is
underway now. It's almost concluded, so I'd expect we'll be bringing reports back to you in a matter of months in terms of the impact of that and how we plan to manage and some recommendations around that. In terms of how much, I will pass to Michael and Sam, because page 271, which contains the magic numbers, is a little bit small in paper form, but from memory, there is about 1.5 million to support existing bus services in terms of return of park and ride, and the other services within the city centre. And in terms of accessibility, the way I think it sort of links to the point Neil made. The vast majority of bus services in the city are purely commercial bus services. They are for the operators to determine how they operate. The purpose of the partnership is to make sure that the council and users and indeed non-users have as much influence over those decisions as possible, so that bus operators can make informed decisions and actually use it as a sounding board. In terms of the accessibility point, I think a charter obviously is something that everybody signs up to, but that will not just appear, that will have workshops and stakeholders engaged in developing that so that it actually meets the needs of those people. I don't know whether Michael, you want to come in or Sam come in and add some detail.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of sort of governance, obviously got the operational delivery group, but we have a significant number of groups below that. And one of the key steps, we're still looking to arrange those first meetings now with an interim chair for each of the groups. But some of the key steps will be for those groups to elect their chair as one of their first actions, but also to agree their frequency of meetings. But we will have particular subgroups around performance and reliability, infrastructure improvements, ticketing, passenger and stakeholder engagement and marketing. And all of those will be feeding through to the chair and to the operational delivery group. So we have got a much more robust engagement across all key topics relating to operation of the buses across the city going forward as part of the partnership.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duggan.
Thank you, and very much welcome those enhanced arrangements, as you say. You know, like Councillor Kilbane, you know, I have been critical in the past of the quality bus partnership in terms of level inclusion, and I'm certainly intend to ensure that we have a wider representation of stakeholders. As you'll be aware, you know, the QBP initially only had political representation. In the last couple of years, we've had wider representation with people from the Bus Forum and other organisations. In terms of accessibility, there's a combination between the physical infrastructure which will be provided, more real-time indicators, more improved shelters, those sorts of infrastructure improvements, but also the enhanced partnership forum will be open to cross-section of user groups, including the bus forum, but of those that represent young people, people with disabilities, the different types of users and potential users of the services will be able to influence what happens across the city as part of that arrangement.
Thank you very much. I'll come back, but I'm keen. I've got a couple others waiting. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question was really, I suppose, similar to Councillor Kilbane's second question, really, which was about the stakeholder forum, which quite a number of the speakers referred to. And I think Michael's already responded about the operational situation with the delivery group, and that has subgroups. But could you just say a bit about your plans now and timescales for setting up the stakeholder forum and involving the sort of groups Councillor Dagon has just referred to?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. It's absolutely key. We need to reach out to as many people as we can to engage on that forum. Obviously, we have engagement with various groups already relating to bus service across the city, but there is also underrepresentation of many groups across the city, and we will be seeking to reach out to those by whatever methods we can, obviously through social media, through publicity, etc., to get engagement onto those groups. We are looking to establish those meetings very soon. So the initial meetings will be set up certainly within the next few weeks. Say the first steps for those groups under an interim chair will be to elect a chair to take that group forward. But it will also be to arrange their own frequency of meetings. So whilst the enhanced partnership does lay out a meeting frequency, actually these groups can decide on their own frequency. And I think at the moment I would strongly recommend that they had an enhanced frequency of meetings, because there are so many challenges which we do need to meet very quickly. One of the absolute keys for the city is to get the BSIP funding off the DFT and get that into the capital programme as soon as possible, because obviously for many months, as we've waited for the Department of Transport to make decisions around the BSIP and to allocate that funding, that has sort of had our hands tied in terms of what we have been able to do. And now we have a real opportunity to move forward. And it's important we engage properly across the city to take buses forward, because this is very much about getting the operational network for the city to get people back onto the bus. And we are very aware of those challenges that we face, working with both stakeholders, passengers and operators in terms of bringing those things forward. And so the key now is to get that funding into the capital programme, into the revenue, so we can start to move forward in many of those things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. My question is very basic. Like many councillors, we'll all have received phone calls from people upset that the bus hasn't turned up. And if it's an hourly service, this makes it very difficult for older residents to make hospital and GP appointments. So I just want to understand how this will make bus services more reliable and dependable, which in turns make them more sustainable because people can rely on them. I just need to understand how all this is going to be visible to the average bus user.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think one of the keys here is that we do want a resilient network. I think that's what you're talking about. We want a network is resilient. So we have a network we can actually operate. People know when those buses are going to turn up. They turn up each time and every time. And actually we can portray that information then to users so that when they look at the apps, when they look at stops, when they look at timetables, they know that that bus will turn up. Obviously, nationally and locally, bus operators have faced many challenges going forward over the last few months, particularly relating to driver shortage, which is a national issue. And I was speaking only the other day to North Yorkshire with regard to the challenges they have as well with regard to that. And have been speaking also to the LEP around initiatives that we might be able to take in terms of driver training. So I think getting a resilient network with drivers that can actually operate. Now they are a commercial decision, but we have to look as Transport Authority how we can support that and encourage it. And I think that's really important that we do that. We don't just leave it to the commercial operators to do that. The voluntary quality bus partnership, really the arrival now of the enhanced partnership allows for much more of a continuous engagement. It is much more accountable. Obviously we'll have the funding behind it to deliver a number of goals. And some of those will be outside of what I've just spoken about. That obviously improving journey reliability is not just about having a driver, but it's also about network, ensuring that the buses can get to the stop every time so that passengers can board and alight easily, but also has free movement along the network and through the city centre, whereas we already know there are a number of challenges to buses in terms of operating around the city. And we see the partnership and the funding that we now have from the government will enable us to take forward many new initiatives and to work with passengers and other stakeholders to deliver those. So I think at the moment we have got a lot of challenges, but we've also got a big opportunity here to really get on top of the situation that we have in York and to provide real enhancements for passengers.
Sorry,
yeah.
Councillor Cobain.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. No, actually, I just wanted to welcome the 1.3 million on the real-time screens refresh, which I recently heard described as the greatest work of fiction in the English language. And that's when they're not frozen. So the sooner we can crack on with that, the better.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendation in front of us at paragraph 2. Earlier we mentioned that that would be amended. So that is now that the executive is asked to agree the above points. So with that amendment, can I please see if colleagues are happy to accept those points? Thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting those. Thank you very much. So that then moves us on to agenda item 8, which is the Director of Public Health annual report. This starts on page 283 of our agenda packs, and I'll ask Sharon to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm pleased to present to you my report for 2020 to 2022, which covers 2 years of the COVID pandemic. The report doesn't attempt to cover everything to do with the pandemic, but rather focuses on how York as a city responded to the challenges of the pandemic within the context of how the city has coped with historical epidemics such as Spanish flu, for example. We're very fortunate in York to have excellent city archives, and so we were able to pull out and review a great deal of information from those historical periods within the city, as well as looking at previous Director of Public Health annual reports. And really the focus of that was to look at how the experiences of the past, as well as the experiences of the more recent COVID pandemic, can be used to prepare the city for future disease outbreaks. It's very unlikely that COVID will be the last pandemic we ever see. So obviously it's important that we learn the lessons from the past to help inform how we would wish to prepare the city for any future disease outbreaks. I particularly want to draw members' attention to the 4 recommendations in the report, which start at page 43 of the report to page 46. The first one of those is really seeking to build on how the city responded to the COVID pandemic, the new partner relationships that were developed during that time, particularly with the business sector across the city. We know that COVID isn't going to go away. It's going to become endemic. We know that there are probably now more than 3,000 people in the city living with symptoms of long COVID. And we know that COVID is still responsible for a number of hospital admissions, and sadly we're still seeing a small number of deaths due to COVID as well. So it's important that we continue to build on the work that we've done. And so the first recommendation is about developing an approach to living with COVID. The second recommendation then is for myself as Director of Public Health to establish a York Health Protection Committee. Historically, we've shared a health protection group with North Yorkshire, but I think the experience of the pandemic has demonstrated to us the importance of having a York-specific focus and York-specific plans to be able to deal with any future outbreaks. Although, of course, we will continue to work together with our partners in North Yorkshire and in neighbouring authorities where it makes sense to do so. The new recently established York Health and Care Partnership established within the ICS structures has already approved the establishment of a York Health Protection Committee within its governance arrangements. And obviously there'll be reporting through to the Health and Wellbeing Board as well. The third recommendation is around children and young people. You will be familiar, I'm sure, with the phrase COVID baby. And we know that children born during the pandemic are experiencing particular issues which, if they're not addressed, will continue to cause them difficulties through their school life and into adult life. And certainly the school survey we did earlier this year with primary and secondary schools illustrated very well with the stories from young people themselves about some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And so a recommendation that the Children and Young People's Plan for the city that's in that is starting to be developed really takes the findings from that survey and the feedback from frontline staff, such as our health visitors, school nurses, social workers, etc., to inform the new Children's and Young People's Plan. And then the final recommendation is we recognise the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on a significant number of residents across York. So we know that alcohol use has gone up. We know that people have experienced weight gain. We know that there have been particular impacts on individuals' mental health. And we know that those factors have also had an impact on an increase of domestic abuse, for example. So the fourth recommendation is really about the council's public health team. So my team continuing our efforts around that. And then I'd also wish to draw members' attention to the progress report on the recommendations from the 2019 Director of Public Health Annual Report that starts at page 50 over those next few pages that illustrates some of the progress that we're making. So I'm recommending to the executive that you approve the publication of the report, subject to the correction of some typos that I'm sure you will have picked up as you read the report, and also some minor formatting issues, but the content of the report is here. So I'm very happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. I hope that's not a test for members of the executive now to note the typos, but thank you for that. Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to thank Sharon and her team, who have been through some really difficult and challenging times, which are now part of our history. Their dedicated work and incredible commitment in the face of the never-ending demands that were brought about by the pandemic has been inspirational. I think my colleagues would join me in expressing our most sincere thanks and gratitude for their work. I have to say, I found this report absolutely fascinating. It was a really interesting report to read, particularly the historical context and the personal comments on the impact of the pandemic, showing just how much the work of our public health team, NHS staff, volunteers, key staff and partners did to help the city weather the storm. Their work is recognised in this report and will be remembered for many decades. The impact of COVID is still with us, and the support services, businesses, schools and community organisations are still affected. There are lessons to be learnt and best practice to be embedded, all of which came about from an emergency response we had to make to the pandemic, and the report recognises this. The recommendations are very important, as Sharon has outlined, building on citywide partnerships and working relationships developed during the pandemic, developing a York strategy for living with COVID, ensuring that plans are in place for any future outbreaks through the York Health Protection Committee, and developing a new children's plan for York, which will include the impact of the pandemic, particularly on children and young people's mental health. We know too that many people across the city are still feeling the impact of the virus on their mental and physical health, as well as their financial well-being. Support for those struggling is still available. So if that affected anybody that is listening, do ask for help and make sure you don't suffer in silence. I'm sorry to say on this beautiful sunny day that winter is coming and the NHS is still under extreme pressure. So it's crucial we take simple steps to protect the most vulnerable in our communities. COVID and flu could combine, and there's no room for complacency. Health and social care workers, people with a weakened immune system, pregnant women and others at greater risk from the virus can already get their autumn booster jab, along with over 65s, and many will have had a text message to tell them so. I would urge anyone that's eligible who's yet to get their vaccine to book it through the online website or by calling 119 as soon as possible if they haven't done so. In conclusion, Chair, I'm very happy to support the publication of the report of the Director of Public Health.
Thank you very much. I'll just check if there are any other comments. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Thanks for the report, Sharon. On page 331, recommendation 3, we note that the impact of the lockdowns and restrictions on children's health and well-being, particularly the mental health, calls for a children's plan for York. I'm just wondering, what would that look like and how would it be resourced to deliver the things that were in that plan?
Yes, so the actual development of the Children and Young People's Plan will be led by Martin Kelly as the corporate director with responsible for children. However, the Children and Young People Plan is really intended to be that kind of key strategic document, focusing on what we need to do as a whole city, including our partners around improving the health outcomes, life aspirations, etc., for our children and young people across the city. The specific element that I'll be working with Martin on is really around those health aspects, looking at ensuring that our universal services have the right training, support, looking at the resources that are available to be able to provide really high quality universal services. So the vast majority of our families in York fall within universal provision. So that's our health visitors, our school nurses, our schools, families themselves, their communities. That's where the majority of our children and young people sit. So it's really important that we have that kind of whole system wraparound support. Some members may be very familiar with the statement that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think so part of the Children and Young People's Plan will be about creating an environment in York that enables our children and young people to thrive. The other elements then, of course, is our the importance of early intervention. So where our universal services, be that a health visitor or a teacher, whoever it might be a grandparent, or parents themselves, or children themselves, once they're able to communicate themselves, will raise issues that require additional support. And then obviously as a local authority, taking that lead and working with partners to ensure that we have good pathways in place and support services to be able to refer those children and young people into that need additional support, and then obviously specialist care. So the Children and Young People Plan is a really important document, and we don't have Martin Kelly here today, but I'm sure he will be working on a timescale for bringing that report back to the executive in due course.
Thank you.
And just the other one, I mean, it's great to hear it. I think, you know, the reality is that a CAMS referral now is very difficult, and CAMS support, you've got to be pretty much suicidal before there's any intervention as a young person. So, you know, the resourcing is a worry. It's not necessarily there in the way that it needs to be. Just something that I thought was missing from the report, which was the impact of COVID on health inequalities in the city, whether they increased those inequalities or brought them together. Can you any comments on that?
Yeah. I mean, first on the resourcing issue, you're absolutely right. And I think workforce is a real challenge for us at the moment across the whole of the health and care system. So just to reassure members, the health and care system is very aware of that and is working together really in partnership, and I'm sure Jamila would agree, across children's and adults health and care. This is something that we're very concerned about and that we're working on at the moment. In terms of health inequalities, yes, absolutely. York, as in every other local authority across the country, has seen an increase in health inequalities. For a number of reasons, really. Some of those outside local authority control, because they're to do with access to NHS services that clearly were impacted by the pandemic. So we saw the cessation of cancer screening programs, for example, during the pandemic. We saw restricted access to primary care services and to mental health NHS provision. And that has resulted in people, for example, presenting to A&E with late diagnosis of cancer because it wasn't picked up earlier. That then inevitably shortens people's life expectancy. As a result of that, we've seen an increase in people presenting in hospital with respiratory conditions, with cardiovascular issues such as diabetes, heart disease, stroke, dementia, who again are presenting late. So that has had an impact, and it's too early from the data to show yet what impact that will have had in terms of excess deaths, for example, in York. But we are collecting that data, and I'm sure that we will see a shortened life expectancy and an increase in excess deaths because of those issues. And then, of course, we're also seeing issues such as delayed speech and language development and social development in our COVID babies. Some of those are now having their 2-year reviews. So our health visitors are definitely picking up delays around speech and language development, particularly, but sensory development, cognitive development in our children. And we have a campaign in place at the moment to try and address that. I mentioned earlier, we've seen an increase in worrying levels of alcohol intake. We know that a number of people have gained weight. I've mentioned the increase in domestic abuse. So all of those issues will have impacted on health inequalities, but across the country, not just in York. So clearly a great deal of work that needs to be done as we come out of the pandemic. And then now straight into the impacts of cost of living pressures. So some of our most vulnerable residents will have suffered the worst impact of the pandemic and are now experiencing the worst impacts of cost of living. So clearly a lot to do for us, not just as a council, but a lot for the NHS to do and a lot for our partners to do as well.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, I think Jamila may be indicating to say the same thing. I think just in terms of that question around young people's mental health, I think we did put some money, additional funding in the budget, and Jamila might be able to, I think we're close to commissioning that service now.
If the button works.
All right, it's working now. So yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of points. One point around the inequalities coming out of COVID. We are working quite closely, but especially adult social care, with our York Health and Care Partnership around virtual wards. So these are a service that we're bringing in to support those people we know who have long-term conditions who might have been impacted during COVID.
It's not you, it's definitely the microphone.
Is that better? I had this problem last time. It must be me, around supporting people with long-term conditions and ensuring that we reduce the number of people coming into hospital. As we all know, there's a lot of pressure on the acute trusts at the moment around admissions and also discharging people, but using sort of different innovative approaches of supporting people at home, and that's the work that we're doing through the York Health and Care Partnership. The second part was around mental health, and I know there are lots of conversations around CAMHS waiting list, and we're looking at and working with TUV around what does that new CAMHS offer look like. But from the survey that Public Health did around schools and young people in particular, talked about a lot of their needs were around early intervention, counselling support, different varied supports that were outside of sort of what CAMHS would need, and they sat on a CAMHS waiting list. So we've worked with Councillor and brought in and the service is up and running for 12 and 19-year-olds around counselling, and then 19 to all age with York Mind, around 180,000 investment in that, and hopefully that will support taking people off a CAMHS waiting list where they don't belong, and much more to the services that can be readily available. So hopefully we'll have a CAMHS out soon.
Thank you very much. Keen to move on in terms of the agenda item, Sharon. So a brief.
I just really wanted to say something about early years. So obviously we all understand that prevention is better than cure. So the school wellbeing service are doing a very good job with our schools, and schools themselves are doing a tremendous job in supporting children with low-level mental health issues. We also use some of our COVID monies to invest in the voluntary sector. So we've been able to expand our mental health champion work and quite a lot of work with York CVS around challenging the stigma around mental health issues and encouraging people to come forward early. So as Jamila has indicated, through that kind of early intervention work, really trying to pick up people early before their problems become significant and they need access to specialist care.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendation in front of us, which Councillor Runciman has suggested that we endorse to approve the publication of the report, and obviously included within that report are the Director of Public Health recommendations. So if I could please see from colleagues that they are happy to accept that, so it's a clear consensus in favour of that recommendation. Thank you very much. So that then takes us on to our final agenda item today, which is Haxby Station update and next steps. This starts on page 343 of our agenda pack. I think I'm going to James to start us off on this one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So back in December last year, exec approved the Talthorpe site as our proposed Haxby station location. That project has obviously progressed quite significantly in that time, and government have announced 1.1 million of extra funding in that time as well. The report before you seeks decisions so that officers can progress the project further, and most notably that's around submitting a planning application and undertaking a procurement process, which is what will ultimately define the cost. The report and annexes also confirm the public consultation responses, which shows 81% support for the project. As detailed in the report, we've also submitted a levelling up fund bid to fund complementary wider transport improvements to maximise the integration with other transport modes. Richard is the project manager, is here today. I don't really want to add anything, Richard.
No, not particularly. I think we're just seeking approval to advance to the next stages really in this project. We are up to the point now where time is critical that we do advance a planning application.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Councillor de Gorne in a second, just to say how pleased I am about the progress and the steps towards bringing a new railway station to Haxby and for York. I know that local residents in that area have been waiting patiently for many years for a much needed new railway station. And I think what's really important is offering new sustainable travel options and connections, obviously locally, but also regionally. And this project, alongside our other major transport projects, so a few examples, dualling of the Outer Ring Road and investment in bus infrastructure, is all aimed at leading to that improved connectivity and more commuting opportunities for York residents. The chosen site, as has been outlined in this paper and others before it, has clear benefits. However, understandably, there will be some legitimate concerns over local impacts. So it is crucial moving forward that the community is kept involved to mitigate those concerns and therefore make the new station at Haxby a real community asset. And in that vein, I know that I and others look forward to working with the local community, Network Rail and the Department for Transport to make the project happen and move it forward. So it is of real benefit, and it does happen for the wider city. Councillor de Gorne.
Exciting development with the additional government funding and the responses from the public consultation feedback, which can help to inform the work that's recommended for approval today. I'd also want to note the fact that this, as you've been said, that the new station would provide direct access to rail network for thousands of local residents in the Haxby and Wigginton's and surrounding communities. So potentially new access for employment, business and leisure opportunities, as well as better connectivity and faster, more efficient, sustainable travel. So I look forward to working with local stakeholders and delivery partners to ensure this project is finally realised and bring the benefits to the local community and the city. So I'd very much want to endorse the recommended next steps so that we can move forward quickly on delivering this project, taking account the views of the local community and potentially drawing in levelling up funding to help make that connectivity even more attractive than is in the initial proposal.
Thank you very much. Open it for any questions or comments from colleagues. Councillor Kilbane.
No, thanks, Chair. I just want to clarify something to start with, James. You said 81% of respondents supported the project. So supported the project on that site or just supported a train station in Haxby?
I can probably answer that. The consultation that was undertaken back in 2020 was the principle of a station within the Haxby area. This particular consultation that was undertaken earlier this year was specifically at a Turthorpe Road site.
So it was 81% support in terms of this location. I think is the answer.
Thanks. And just we've got on page 346 where the risks are spelt out, saying funding for the station project being granted by government as expected, hopefully by the end of 2022. Have we heard any more on that?
So Richard attends a monthly catch up with DFT where we talk through where the business case is at that Network Rail are working on. Richard, I don't know if you can add much more detail about that, but the business case is nearly there. So
that's right. We're still waiting on certain things back from Network Rail, particularly the cost. For instance, to refer back to DFT for a decision. Certainly, all indications that we've had to date is that, in particular, the 1.1 million, which was announced a couple of months ago, is all positive news. But clearly, until we get something in writing, that is always a risk that would have to be considered.
Just a couple more, Chair. So with those sort of risks in the background, and I think our contribution to the project as a council is 4 million, isn't it? How much are we expecting that 4 million to go up by, given the increase in construction costs? Given that the deadline for completion is March 2024, how long can we wait for the government to come forward with the money? And if those things, if it spirals out of control in terms of costs, or if the government decides not to bring the money forward, what would be the abortive costs of the project?
So I think I'm just trying to, sorry, I've forgotten some of the questions that were in there. I think there were multiple questions, but I think the abortive costs, obviously, there's an element of that. We're funding 25% from memory, so we would fund 25% of that abortive cost potentially. But the DFT, as I say, the DFT inclinations are that we will carry on. The announcement of funding this year sort of confirms that. The discussions with DFT have also confirmed that they would be willing to, as long as work had started by 2024, they may be still willing to award the funding. So actually it's a start on site by 2024 potentially, rather than completion.
And just one last question. The other part of the Restoring Your Railway Fund that applies to our area was the York to Beverley line. What's happening with that?
So that's a different fund. So this is the New Stations Fund, which is where projects are identified as being well advanced, and we're bidding into the New Stations Fund. The York to Beverley line is obviously a branch off the Scarborough line, or was historically a branch off that line. There is 50k being allocated to do a business case, an initial business case, to see where that is at. So that's almost where we were 4 or 5 years ago in terms of this project. So it's significantly behind, but the two projects do coincide. The Levelling Up Fund bid, for instance, that we've put in is references the bids from North Yorkshire, which also focus on this key rail network through to Scarborough, and about capacity and time improvements, as well as station and passenger improvements along the whole length of the line through North Yorkshire as well. So there's a complementary element to this project, to the existing line, and to a benefit to the Beverley project if those capacity increases are captured.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on page 341 and over to 342. So could I please see if colleagues are happy to accept those recommendations? So that's clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations. And thank you very much. Our final agenda item is urgent business. I don't believe that we have any urgent business today. So just to thank everybody for participating and attending this morning's executive, and I'll see certainly most of the councillors and officers later today at full council. Thank you very much.